when we develop emotional sobriety, we become the sifter of our own experience. So
I like it.
I have an experience and I sift through it and I keep what's going to be of value and grow me, and I let go of the rest. That becomes the healthy thing, that I'm actively participating in the experience I'm having. And so if I sift through it and I see something, God, that feedback they gave me, that was right on. There is a part of me that's exactly like that. And obviously it's showing up more than I realized.
Bill Wilson, co-founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, wrote in 1952, "If we examine every disturbance we have, great or small, we will find at the root some unhealthy dependence and its consequent demand." Wilson suggested that if we could identify and continually surrender these unrealistic and unrealizable demands, that we may then be able to accomplish what he imagined to be the recovery's next frontier, something he called emotional sobriety. Flash forward 70 years and join psychotherapists and best-selling authors Thom Rutledge and Dr. Allen Berger, who have taken up the mantle of exploring Bill Wilson's new frontier. Welcome to Emotional Sobriety.
Welcome to Emotional Sobriety, the podcast. I'm Thom Rutledge, and with me is producer Patrick Newman and Dr. Allen Berger. How are you boys doing?
Well, excited to follow up on our podcast from last week.
Yeah.
Patrick and I were just talking about, how disappointment has, been riddled through both of our lives and through the lives of everybody. And, last time we kind of explored it and talked about some of the texture of it, right? The different aspects of it, and today we're going to be focusing on, what do you do with that? How do you best cope with it?
Yeah, the how-to, because it's like one of my takeaways from that last time was, I found myself kind of being in other. I don't know if you guys do this or not, but I noticed that when we have certain conversations here on the podcast, I kind of carry the conversation forward into my week, and I talk to people about it, and it's like this was one of them, and one of the things I was. And I can't remember the exact even words that we were talking about, but the idea that we hit on toward the end of that, which was can you be disappointed, or even can you even be devastated and still be okay? Because that's emotional sobriety. And it's like, okay doesn't mean everything's wonderful. Okay means that, to use your terms, Alan, I'm holding on to myself. To me, it's the idea of keeping both feet planted on the ground, even though if I may be off balance, but I'm not, I'm a weeble. I wobble, but I don't fall down, kind of thing. And that's the challenge, is because disappointment is, it comes with the job of being a human being. Maybe there are people who would say they have not had disappointment, but I would say those people have not had opportunities to grow that some of the rest of us have had.
Right. Our instinct is to personalize everything, but the key to not being destroyed by disappointment is to not take it personally.
Yeah. Yes. And that's it. And that I'm glad you say that, because to bring that up in especially in a conversation that we're defining as a how-to conversation, because that's one of the things I think a lot of times that I'll notice that response to when I talk to people about not taking something personally is there's an automatic response from lots of people, which is well, that's easier said than done. And it's like, and of course the response to that I always have, which is, well, of course it is. It's like, but when we get into this kind of stuff, easier said than done sometimes means I don't think I can do it, and it's like, yeah, it is easier said than done. And we're not suggesting that to say don't take something personally. That's not a technique. We have to find out how do you do that? How do you get there? How do you find yourself there? How do you what do you do when you drift off, and how do you get yourself back? It's all of that stuff. There's so much technique to it. And that's what I always think we're talking about when we talk about how to, is technique. How do you do it?
Let me elaborate on that a minute, Thom, because I've taken something from what you've said and use that to help people with this taking, things personally.
Okay.
And one of the things that I've done is I said, look, maybe the first thing before you get to not taking it personally is just entertain the idea that possibly just have a shadow of a doubt that maybe it wasn't personal what the person did.
Reasonable doubt. That's it.
Yeah,
Reasonable doubt.
have a reasonable doubt that it wasn't personal.
It might not have been. Yeah.
It might not have been. And see, if you just let that idea slip into your consciousness, right? Just a little bit, let it have some space inside your consciousness that it might grow. And then the follow-up question is, so if you have this shadow of a doubt, or reasonable doubt, as you call it, then you might ask, well, if it wasn't personal, then what did it mean about them? See, then the second question,
it opens up a follow-up question.
It opens up another question to just see if you can further elaborate on or expand the possibility that it might not have been personal.
Because I just need to say this out loud, because you're right. Taking it personally basically stops us in our tracks. That becomes a punctuation. And we no longer are investigating.
See, that's where then the reaction comes in. Oh my God, I'm not good enough, or, I failed, or I'm this, or I'm that. And we go into either self-doubt or, now we start to blame them. Look at how unreasonable they are. Or
it's judgment either way. It begins with doubt, but I'm going to judge them or I'm going to judge me.
Usually the first response is to deal with this by judgment.
Judging that stops the investigation.
It paralyzes you. It paralyzes you. It keeps you stuck in an objection rather than in coping. And see, what we're looking for is to get the door open enough to mobilize your resources to cope with the situation that's bothering you.
Yes.
And that's why I love that when you said it, I started applying it to this thing personally thing. Just for a moment, can you entertain the possibility that maybe the slightest chance, but maybe it wasn't personal? And if it wasn't, then what could that mean?
Yeah, you can also ask that in the form of hypotheticals, which are really challenging to us when we're very, very judgmental. If that were not the case, if that were not the case, it's what might you be? What might be another alternative way of looking at it, or what might be just the hypothetical. But if that's not it, what would it be? What could it be?
What could now another technique, and this comes from Gestalt therapy, to exaggerate it. So what you can do is to say, all right, if it's personal, let's think of all the things that it means about you. Then go ahead and elaborate. And take it to an absurd extreme, right? And then they go ahead and they elaborate on this. And I say, are you sure you're talking about them? And they go, what do you mean? Well, that's how I experience you think about yourself. And then they go, oh, wait a minute. Wait a minute. Maybe I'm not seeing them at all. Maybe I'm seeing my projection of how I feel about myself. I mean, I really think that that's a real part of this stuff, is that, in graduate school, we learned about what's called the projective fit. So if somebody is, let's say, putting you down, well, if there's a part of you that agrees with them, that part gets activated.
Yeah.
And now it's 2 against nobody. You're not on your side. It's you and that other person against you. And down the tubes you go, down the drain you go.
Well, and interestingly, one of the things is if you are activated by it, if you are offended by it, then what that tells us is there is a part of you that agrees. Because I tell people all the time that if people say something to me that I know is absolutely not true about me, it brings the immediate shrug. What?
Or is true and you've accepted it, right?
Yeah, there's no big deal. Yeah, so if somebody were to say, Tom,
it's not just it's not true. If it's something I know, like, hey, you're a selfish asshole. God, I know that's a possibility.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah. Or something. Yeah. For me, one of the things is because I love the idea that we have choices over the sources of self-esteem, that everything doesn't have the same value. And it was such a freedom for me to understand that I'm not very invested in being competent at being an administrator. If somebody were to say, you're so unorganized and confused in your organizational skills, I would say, yeah. and your point is, it's like you're stating the obvious. It's like, but in the old days, and this is a big takeaway, I think, if you haven't done this, people need to pay attention to this, is this choice about, you have choices about your sources of self-esteem. When you have that should monster in your head that tells you all these bad things, it's like what ends up happening is that the things that you act like you value more are just things that you tell yourself you're bad at, when in fact you have to ask the additional question is, do you care? When I used to work for other people, I was always in trouble for writing bad case notes. I did case notes all wrong. It's like I always did, and I would try it a little bit, but it's like but I finally realized I don't care, and so I think that's part of that too. And that may be a part of, we could probably tie that into the disappointment thing too, is the idea is pay attention to whether or not a disappointment, the definition of disappointment is any kind of negative, or less than positive feedback. It's like some of it doesn't need to matter.
Well, that's interesting about the case notes. So was there a time when you took that very personally and you thought you were bad because
because I was in trouble and I was getting, in trouble and it's like, and more than just, I was just trying to keep a job because I probably wasn't going to lose my job over that stuff. It's like, yeah, it was years later after I was no longer doing that I realized, I didn't get that at the time. It's like, wow, what a bunch of wasted energy.
I was a personal assistant for a couple of years, and I was the worst personal assistant in the world. And
I bet you would be. Yeah,
that was rough. That was rough. Yeah. But I'm glad that I seem to have dropped the ball on taking that personally, because if I was still clinging to that, I would be in terrible shape.
Absolutely. I mean, that's a good thing to remember, is that, most of us, some people are just unbelievably and I think irritatingly multi-talented, and those people get on my last nerve. But it's like most of us suck at some things, and it's like, I think that's an okay thing.
So see, that's the other thing I think we're saying, is that be open. If somebody is saying something to you and it bothers you, that maybe you've got a blind spot, that you're not looking at something you need to look at too. It's not just rejecting these things, but it's really, the way I've heard it described is when we develop emotional sobriety, we become the sifter of our own experience. So
I like it.
I have an experience and I sift through it and I keep what's going to be of value and grow me, and I let go of the rest. That becomes the healthy thing, that I'm actively participating in the experience I'm having. And so if I sift through it and I see something, God, that feedback they gave me, that was right on. There is a part of me that's exactly like that. And obviously it's showing up more than I realized.
Yes, and to put that into what we were saying before about the stuff that we don't necessarily care about, this is the harder piece. We're going to let go of the disappointment that Patrick is not a good personal assistant because he doesn't care. It's like, but we get feedback and we realize, because we have enough humility to keep our defenses down and say, oh, wow, this is something I can look at and I can get better. And that's one of the, this may seem corny because I think we find different ways of saying this throughout recovery, but it's so pivotal, is, the Ryan Holiday wrote a book called The Obstacle is the Way. And I love the name of that book. I love the book itself too, but it's like, but the idea being, it's like, no, that's an opportunity. Yeah. It's like, okay, this is, hell, we all three of us have one thing in common. The world around us, maybe certain individuals, but the world around us told us at some point, we got a serious problem with alcohol and drugs, and if we didn't take that seriously, and the fact that we're all three sitting here today is the idea that we did in fact realize that was a criticism of us. It was a critique of us that was absolutely true. Only we were going to step up to it. We're the only ones that could sift through it and make something of it.
That's why I'm continually fascinated by people who look at this stuff not through a recovery framework, because that's how I look at everything because of my lived experience. And I can only recognize problems as opportunities because of reaching a bottom and then finding kind of like some steps and climbing up from that. As a mode of living, I need to recognize problems as opportunities, or I wouldn't be able to make it. Outside of that recovery framework, how people can come to some of these same places is I don't know how they do it, but I'm, kudos to them.
Well, I wrote down that's a wonderful sentence. I can only see problems as opportunities.
That's right. We're always looking for the emergent opportunity, right? In any situation, there's an emerging opportunity.
To go to your language, Alan, to look for new possibilities.
That's right. There's always that. And one of the things that I've been talking about lately, and I talked about in the emotional sobriety study group that we have, that, the wider the range of possible responses, being able to find the most appropriate response to a particularly challenging situation, you're going to have a better chance of coping. And so what we're trying to do is help people move away from their habitual ways of responding and discover new possibilities. That's the exciting thing about this. I think it's the thing that keeps you and I most excited. Continuing to be excited about the work we do, both clinically and through the Thursday night group. I mean, there's a woman that got on the Thursday night group. Remember, she shared and was crying about what this meant for her, how she's discovered her recovery, wants to go back and be a therapist because of this. She got burnt out and couldn't see the way. I mean, that's the meaning that this stuff has. And it's particularly relevant to all of this stuff about disappointment. Now, one other thing that we left, because last time we talked a lot about, what do you do when you're in a situation and that there's a lot out of your control, like the political scene right now that's going on in our country, and the incredible disappointment people have had with Supreme Court decisions lately, and how it seems to be so out of touch with the majority of individuals in our society. What do we do with that? How do we manifest it? And you and I talked about it afterwards, Tom. We were saying that, look, one of the things that's really very helpful is when you're confronting a situation you don't like, get involved, do something to change it at whatever level. Joining a group, volunteering your time for, a politician that you do think can make a difference. But whatever it is to mobilize yourself with the feelings you have. See, look, our nation became free because people said, BS with these taxations without representation. They got fed up with somebody telling us what to do when we had no say in it, right?
Right.
And that created an unbelievable movement that men and women gave their lives to have this country become independent. Right. Our
but let me say, because I think this really gets to the whole essence of what emotional sobriety is. Because emotional sobriety to me is always about being able to come back to find that place of sometimes we'll say peace, but I don't mean like peace, like everything's okay. I mean, just this of just authenticity, I guess is a better word for it, of in the moment. So the idea is it's a two-prong approach. It's like, yes, go take some action. We can't control the other people, places, and things. We do have the power of influence, but we have all the power of influence only by doing what is best for us at that time. So go do that. Take the action. Get involved in the group, but then don't forget to come back home to your center. And the idea is, look, and this is the part about that is like, because ultimately one day we're all going to die. And on that day, everything will not be settled. and everything in our lives, personal lives or our public life will not be okay. It's like, so what we need to be doing every single day is, as we do the best we can, as we be the best person we can be, we need to be sure and come back and realize, and this is kind of where we started off today, which is I can be incredibly disappointed. I can be deeply pained by what's going on around me and still be okay. I can still have my feet on the ground. I can basically be able to connect to my gratitude without it having to be a way of trying to pretend that the bad stuff isn't happening. It's like I call it appropriate compartmentalization. I can put that over there and say, okay, we're working on that. There's nothing more I can do. I learned this in the program too. I mean, I just remember there's people in the program early on saying, you ask yourself the question, is there anything else I can do about this today? And if there's not, you got the rest of the day off, right?
And listen, it's very important when you're doing this to unhook yourself from the results.
Yes.
See, that becomes incredibly important. When I get involved, it doesn't mean, let's say I support a politician, and if he doesn't get elected, it doesn't mean that I just wasted my time. No, you did not. You did what you felt was important, and your reward comes in being committed to your values and your integrity. And that's the payoff. It's an intrinsic reward. And see, that's the other thing that's getting reprogrammed for us in emotional sobriety. Instead of looking for these extrinsic rewards, other validation, so to speak, we're learning how to validate ourselves.
Right.
We're learning how to do the right thing, and to feel good about it because it was the right thing for us.
Right. We change. What I think is we change our job description of ourselves as human beings, which is the job description is not to, I need to accomplish, the government in my country to be what I want it to be. The job description is I need to every single day of my life be the best version of myself that I can be. And if I am doing that, then I'm doing my job.
Right. That's the pivot point on step 7. Looking for the best possible attitude towards ourselves, towards others, and towards life.
And what we're saying with what emotional sobriety says is, and by the way, that's enough. That's enough.
Can I read a quote to you guys?
Yeah.
It's from Cornel West. Hope and optimism are different. Optimism tends to be based on the notion that there's enough evidence out there to believe things are going to be better, much more rational, deeply secular. Whereas hope looks at the evidence and says, it doesn't look good at all. Doesn't look good at all. Going to go beyond the evidence to create new possibilities based on visions that become contagious, to allow people to engage in heroic actions, always against the odds, no guarantee whatsoever. That's hope. I'm a prisoner of hope. Going to die a prisoner of hope.
Beautiful.
Very nice. Well, great way to wrap up this episode, you guys.
Good luck managing any and all future disappointments.
Absolutely.
Tend your life. Tend your myth. Cultivate your narrative with whomever you're with. Then with glass in hand and children on one knee, bring some stories. Bring your stories back to me. It ain't a crime to be a human. Never be ashamed to be yourself. Rest assured that whatever you're doing will entertain me like nobody else. So here's to us, my old friends, until it's time to drink the wine and break the bread again. With glass in hand and children on one knee, bring some stories, bring your stories back to me.